you can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand virtually. I don't always see you. And now we're going to, we welcome, let me just show you who it is. Erin Greenbaum, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction here. Cannot wait. Erin Greenbaum has worked in and around nonprofits for 15 years. As a member of HIAS, that's Hebrew Immigrant and Aid Society, Public Affairs Department, she gets to do what she loves, meeting and talking to people, helping them do good. Erin also oversees the HIAS archives, which date back to 1909. Before joining HIAS, Erin managed corporate and foundation relations at the New York Foundling, one of New York's oldest and largest social service agencies. Erin has previously worked in corporate philanthropy at Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and held positions in nonprofit fundraising and consulting. So with no further ado, Erin.
Thank you so much. It was so great to hear that update from Alan, and thank you all for having me today. I'm very pleased to be, I guess, here, right? That's a relative term now.
You're here,
but
you're here.
I'm very pleased to be with you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to hear powerful stories of individual families, because it really personalizes a system that is so vast and often very impersonal. So I see my role today as taking a chance to zoom out a bit and place the work of Alan and all of these other volunteers into the context of the larger US resettlement landscape. So Vanessa, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slides. Thank
you. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Yes, can play that. This always takes me a hot second.
So if you do slideshow, or if you can go down at the corner in the bottom, there's an icon. I'm like pointing like you can see at the bottom. No, over to the left, past the zoom. Yeah, no, over a little to the right. There's that button. There you go.
There we go. Okay, I did it.
Okay.
I learned something this morning. Even if we don't get any other business done, I'll know how to do this.
All right. So this is who HIAS is. I know that you guys are very familiar with us. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide if you don't mind. Great. Okay. So by the time that you in your home community are in a position to be meeting a family like the Khans, what we're seeing is actually the final stage of the resettlement process. So you can see that's still a huge piece. Right, that's meeting them at the airport, setting up the apartment that you saw, filling it with culturally appropriate food, and then actually helping them access the building blocks of that they're going to need to create an actual life in America, to create the infrastructure that they're going to need to integrate into American society and to become Americans, which is what we want for all of our arrivals. But for most refugees, resettlement is a much, much longer process, taking years of paperwork and bureaucracy. And that's been made longer by the previous administration, which not only drastically reduced refugee flows, but also actively caused log jams at every turn. And that was not an accident, that was deliberate. I want to emphasize that because it really played a role in the experiences of these families. So if you can go to the next slide. This is what resettlement actually looks like from start to finish. This is the path. And it can take years and years. So and what's really challenging about resettlement is not only is it such a complex path, but it's an option for only a tiny portion of the world's 82 million displaced people. It's a pretty complicated slide, so I'm not going to walk you through each piece, but I wanted to include it today because I think it does a really good job of demonstrating what a long and convoluted system refugees have to navigate before they even get here. And of course, they're often navigating it in a language that they may or may not speak. So first, to summarize, first, you have to be referred for resettlement by the UN or an NGO in the place where you have landed. we're either in your primary country or to whichever country you have fled. Then your application goes through the Resettlement Support Center. Then it's referred to immigration, the USCIS. That's that's the green rectangle, and then under it the blue one. And you can see that a connection to a resettlement agency like HIAS is actually quite late in the process. If you come all the way down, you can see identification of US site. That's the place where we really get involved. So we HIAS are constantly interfacing with the State Department and with our peers in this process. So you can't bootstrap resettlement. You can't wake up one morning and be like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a resettlement startup. That's not possible. Resettlement is a public-private partnership with the State Department, and you have to be operating under that mandate. And one of the things we're so afraid of during the Trump administration is the revocation of that mandate. Every year you have to reapply, and in the past it's been a real formality. Most of us 9 organizations we're called the voluntary agencies, VOLAG for short. It's not the best acronym, but most of the VOLAGs have been doing this for decades. And so in the past, it's been a foregone conclusion that we're going to keep doing it. But every year in the last administration, there was this fear, they're going to cut to 5 VOLAGs. They're going to cut to 6 VOLAG. And had that happened, there wouldn't have been an option for us to resettle. That's what I'm trying to underscore, that we're really operating as partners of the US government. Of the 9 VOLAGs, 6 are faith-based. We're the only Jewish one. We HIAS are the only Jewish one. And we all operate with a national network of affiliates. And we're all, I think sometimes it's easy to think of the other agencies as competitors, but we're not. We're all partners, and we all coordinate very closely. And when we have these national affiliate networks, we're very careful to not overlap, both of our own feel for efficiency, but also the State Department. It's something the State Department is very mindful of as well. So if you're in a place, you guys are in the catchment of one of our affiliates, but there are plenty of places where, a lot of times I'll hear from someone who's like, well, I want to do something, but like, why is the only person Catholic Charities? Where are the Jews? And the answer is, well, Catholic Charities has that city covered. So then we're not going to be there because they are. So as I said, we each have an affiliate and a network of affiliates. So if you could go to the next slide, I have a map. Yes, I'm going to pause for questions after I do the US. So I'm going to run through resettlement and speak about our US work, and then I'm going to pause for questions because it's a lot of information. Then we'll do international, and then we're going to speak about the multiple refugee crises that are happening right now, including Ukraine. That's the plan, just so everybody knows. Okay, so this is the map of our affiliates. You'll see Chicago proudly there. Of these 24 sites, 7 have been added just in the last 6 months, which is crazy for us. That's super duper fast. We were already working on building back our network from the cuts of the previous administration, but it was taking a lot of time, especially because we weren't necessarily getting the support from the Biden administration that we all were really counting on. As I said, resettlement is a partnership with the State Department, which means that if they drag their feet, we can't move. We can only move at the speed with which they can move. And then with the fall of Kabul, that put an additional strain on our network and on the networks of all of our peer agencies. But at the same time, it actually expedited our ability to finally open these networks, to finally open these additional affiliates. So all of them kind of came online right around the time that all of these Afghan arrivals were coming, which is good because there were 76,000 of them. And I want to put that 76,000 number into context for you guys and just put some math behind that statement. So some of you may, forgive me if I'm telling you something you already know, but the way that resettlement works here is that the president issues a presidential determination every year, and that determines how many refugees the US will accept over the whole fiscal year. In the past, it's been a goal. In the last administration, it was a ceiling. And here it's somewhere in the middle now. But under Obama, the last PD, that's what we call it, presidential determination, the last PD he issued was 110,000. When the administration changed, that dropped to 45,000 and went as low as 15,000 in this previous administration. So from 110 to 15,000. And in May of 2021, President Biden finally declared a PD of 62,500. He was aiming for 125, but he waited so long, we only had half of a fiscal year left because the government fiscal year ends in October. It's an October to October. So half of 125, that's where the 62.5 number comes from. So that's 62,500. So if you think about that 76,000 figure and that 62.5, that's for all the refugees from all the countries, anywhere, for any reason. So to have 76,000 people coming in, so a year's worth of arrivals, in some ways, I mean, depending on if you're counting, right? So like if December 2021 was 15 and December 2020 was 15,000 and August 2021 is 62.5 and you have 76,000, I mean, depending on where you want to start multiplying, you're talking about almost a 10-fold increase in just a matter of weeks. So it's really absolutely astounding. And I just, especially in the context of a system that has been absolutely decimated, it's been an unbelievable lift for all of our affiliates and for all of the VOLAGs. So one of the things that we and the administration did is sponsorship circles. It's basically a form of private sponsorship, and it doesn't take the place of the resettlement agencies, but it augments them, especially in places where there isn't coverage. So HIAS is participating in this program as like an umbrella organizer. And we're building out a network of sponsorship circles. We're calling them welcome circles, but we're overlaying them over our existing synagogue network. So we have a network of about 450 synagogues. So while there are other organizations doing sponsorship circles, we are uniquely situated to build this out because we have a pre-existing network. And so these are groups of private individuals. I think the government said you have to have 5 people. We say you have to have 8. And then you raise your money, you commit to the same amount of money that the government gives each refugee, because if when a refugee, they have to opt out of formal resettlement and say, I will go to a welcome circle. And what that means is on one hand, they're going to get great one-on-one support, but if they have a higher degree of need, that may not be the right place for them. So the welcome circles are really they're taking the place in terms of the experience of a family, they're taking the place of a resettlement agency. So, Alan, you were mentioning that, you're working with HIAS Chicago. So that's a whole agency. There's people who are administering all kinds of formalized programs around employment, around certain kinds of add-on care and services. The welcome circles don't have that because they're much more about volunteers really sort of stepping up and adding extra capacity. So one of the things we're trying to make sure is that family units that have a large degree of need, if they're, have a lot of elderly or medical needs, then we want to make sure that they're making the right choice in terms of staying with an affiliate. Anyway, so it's very exciting. This is a program that we keep using the tried metaphor of we're building a plane as we're flying it. This is a program that went from 0 to executing in about 3 weeks. So we expect to resettle up to 1,000 Afghan refugee arrivals in communities across the country this year. And right now there's 32 circles and 25 of them have been formally matched. And there's tens and tens of circles in various degrees of formation. Once they get completely set up, then they have to get vetted, like a thumbs up from the State Department. So the whole, I hope you're getting the sense of the layers and layers of bureaucracy that go into this, that it's complicated. And that's so hard because everyone wants to rush. You want to rush and help people so fast. But there's just a lot of layers of making sure that everything is done right and that that we're all being really thoughtful. Hold on, I'm not going to global trends just yet. I wanted to just speak a little bit about our history in Chicago. No, just pause. There, yeah, cool. So, as I mentioned, we're really excited that HIAS Chicago is back in business because HIAS Chicago was actually one of our largest affiliates. In at its peak in 1992, it resettled over 3,000 people in a single year from the Soviet Union, and that number dwindled throughout the 2000s. And then the previous administration did a round of cuts targeting resettlement agencies that were not meeting their numbers, which is of course so silly because if you're not bringing in numbers, we can't hit those numbers. But HIAS Chicago was one of the cuts that were forced. And we were really so upset when that happened because Chicago has always been an area that is really, really engaged with refugees. We always come back from our work in that area and are like, wow, there's so much energy here. And so it was really upsetting when HIAS Chicago was forced to close its resettlement operations, and we're absolutely delighted to have them back on this map. Okay, before we go global, I was going to pause here and because it's a lot of stuff. Before we go international, do people have questions?
There was one question. Could you explain how an individual refugee makes that very first contact for referral? How do they make themselves known or learn where to go?
It's not easy. I mean, a couple ways. It depends where they are. They can go to a U.S. embassy. You can go and say, I'd like to submit an opportunity to be resettled. Depending on where you are, you may be making contact with aid workers in the area who can put you through. It's not hard, but it's not super duper easy either. But the main way is through U.S. embassies.
Carol has her hand up. Wait, I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
I'm just wondering, does the State Department have a quota on what parts of the world refugees can come from? Is there still that quota system?
I don't like the word quota, and the quota system you're referring to that was like post-war,
Right.
That got dismantled in the 60s. But they definitely do have, and I think it's really subject to the administration. Like I know that the Trump administration tried to really like have they call it carve outs. They had a lot of carve outs.
Right. I'll
Okay. They have all these carve outs that they'll say, okay, this is for persecuted Christians, and this is for special immigrant visas. And so there is some sense of like regions, but it's not the strict quota system that we were dealing with where, well, I can't get out of Poland because the Poland quota is filled, but can I lie about my name and get on the German, all that kind of stuff, which I can see every time I review the case materials. You can see all of the memos of people talking about like, well, but my kid has this citizenship, so let's swerve in on this quota and all that kind of stuff. So it's not as formal, but depending on the administration, they can sort of carve out different parts of that determination, different targets for people from different parts of the world. Yeah.
So the next question is, you mentioned working with synagogues. Are almost all of them Reform? Are any Orthodox, conservative, recon, renewal? No. I think Floyd wants to know, are there any Orthodox?
There are. Not a lot. We hope there'll be more. We have made some inroads. We're non-denominational. Our biggest base of support is Reform movement. It is, but there's plenty of conservative synagogues that are very committed to our work, and Reconstructionist and non-denominational. There are a few Orthodox. A lot of times that's more like there will be like a committee in a synagogue as opposed to them standing up and saying we're a welcome congregation, or there'll be like a couple Orthodox clergy who will put themselves out there. It's a much quieter support, but it does exist.
Okay. And then the last one is, if you can define that term, I think it's VOLAG.
VOLAG.
Yes.
I'm going to type it. You'll see it actually makes more sense in writing.
Right,
Hold
right.
on. I'll show you. It's this.
Right. You can put it right in the chat.
So voluntary agency. You see that? It's like a,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So HIAS, Catholic Charities, you mentioned a few of them.
yeah, there's 9 of us. Yeah, there's the Lutherans, there's internet IRC is one of them. We're the
Okay.
oldest.
Okay. Does HIAS work with the Jewish Vocational Services to find employment for refugees?
Sometimes it depends on the area. I mean, employment is a huge component of what each affiliate does. So I'm not going to say they don't work with Jewish Vocational Services. I'm sure they collaborate, but a lot of our affiliates have an entire department around employment, training. You know, we push out a lot of materials to our affiliates. We have all kinds of pilots like you know, microeconomic development and microloans, and we do a lot of programming on our own. So, you know, I think that we always try to make sure that we're collaborating with what's on the ground. It's really important to us not to reinvent the wheel. That's our approach both domestically and internationally. But employment is very much baked into the work of resettlement.
Yeah. Alan, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to add that because HIAS here in Chicago, as Erin said, has just been re-gearing up since last fall. They're not yet having employment services, but for that, they're working in connection with Refugee One, which does have employment services.
There you go. Yeah. And that's very common that, you know, they'll team up and add to, yeah.
Does HIAS offer mental health support?
Yes. Again, whether it's rooted in the more internationally, and I was going to talk about that, we do offer it. It depends on what each affiliate has to offer. It varies place to place, but we also make sure that we're offering referrals. And part of what the affiliates do is connecting people to healthcare, and so then that makes it possible for them to access mental health care as well.
Okay. I
All
know
right.
we want to get to the international situation. We've been commenting all week that when we scheduled Erin to come, we didn't know that we'd be in the midst of a, you know, international crisis and so on and so forth. So back to the slideshow.
Yes, the refugee stats.
Okay, let's see if I can find that. Well,
So the next one.
okay, now I know how to do that. There we go. How's that?
There you go. So zooming out further, this is a look at the refugee stats around the world. And what is kind of mind-boggling here is that this is before the fall of Kabul and the invasion of Ukraine. So, you know, feel free to give or take a few million, which is crazy. And I've been quoting 82 million, and I think this 84 it's been like, I can't even keep the number. It's going up so fast. I can't even, every time I think I can cite the number, I turn around and actually it's higher. When I started at HIAS in 2017, the number was 65 million. So it's, and this is generated from the UNHCR. And I do want to point out a couple of notes. The pieces at the bottom, I think, are really important for us to keep in mind. So that 85% of refugees are hosted in developing countries, and that's because they're hosted in countries that neighbor their country of origin. So I, you know, when we as the United States talk about, oh, we don't have room, or 85% of them are in developing host countries. So, and if they can do it, we can do it. I also just wanted to point out that the scale of displacement is so far greater than what can be resolved by resettlement itself alone, even with a functioning system and a fully collaborative administration, which we don't have. I mean, it's better than it had been, but frankly, there's been a lot of disappointment so far, and you know, there's plenty of time to change that, but things haven't changed as much as we all thought that they would. So it's been clear to us at HIAS that if we're going to be serious about serving refugees, we have to go to where they are. The other thing I do want to point out that is that even on the best of situations, only less than 1% of people are going to be eligible for resettlement in the United States. which is the other reason why, if you're serious about refugees, you have to go international. The U.S. resettlement program is really about only the most vulnerable of people, victims of torture, unaccompanied minors, really horrible things have to happen for someone to really be eligible for resettlement in the formal way that the US government does that. So there's so much more need than that. And that's why it's so important for us to have an international presence. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is where we are. These are all of our places. We are in 16 countries outside of the US. You can see that we have, in many of these countries, we actually have multiple offices. So fun fact, our presence in Ecuador is actually 4 times as big as our presence in the United States in terms of full-time staff. So yes, I know we're very excited about Al Franken in public affairs. Our in terms of full-time HIAS employees, not the affiliates, there are 4 times as many HIAS employees in Ecuador. So our US presence, our global presence is quite substantial. I also want to point out, okay, and before I do that, and then, so on the right here, these are our approaches that we apply in all the different countries. We call these our signature approaches, and not every approach is used in every country, but it informs how we think about our interventions. So legal protection, that's going to be us border monitoring and making sure that people know their rights, that they have the right documentation so that they're not exploited. That's particularly the case in Latin America. There's some pretty startling stats and stories about what happens, particularly to women who are forced to cross irregularly. Making sure that if someone trying to get people out of detention or prevent detention, helping them file for asylum in the place where they are, all of that comes under legal protection, and then also strategic litigation. So not just defending individuals, but defending them in a way that creates a legal precedent for other people to benefit. Economic inclusion, so that's going to be poverty prevention. We actually have a graduation model in certain regions that's going to be about digital literacy, workforce training, supporting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And then it's also something we call livelihoods, which is about giving somebody not just a way to support their family, but a way to feel a vocation. So, in Chad, for instance, where people have been stuck in camps for decades, we have the Jewish World Watch actually has funded for a number of years now a permagardening project. And so that's about not just, it's about giving people control, so and empowerment over their food sources and over their ability to support their families. Mental health and psychosocial support, we do a lot of work around this. So it's mental health care triage and mental health care services, but it's so much more than that. So you're talking about support groups, support hotlines, work to combat xenophobia, social integration, all that falls under that umbrella. And then gender-based violence prevention and response. This is actually an area that we're a particularly strong leader in international contexts. And so this is about teaching, it's about prevention. So helping women find women, girls, and LGBTQ individuals find safe spaces, but it's also about preventing child marriage, preventing trafficking, teaching girls and boys what healthy relationships look like, preventing survival sex in some contexts, so many different components. And these stats on the number of, I think the stats for women who are experiencing active sexual violence either during their displacement, during their migration, or immediately after they've landed, it's something like 50%. It's very, very, very high. And so that's why that's a really key focus of our work. I also wanted to add that we added 5 of these countries just since 2019 in response to the Venezuelan migrant crisis. You'll note that's why you'll notice that they're all clustered together like that, right? Because it's really we've had presences in some of these countries, but for instance, we had a presence in Venezuela, but not Colombia, and so as the migration paths moved, it had been Colombia going into Venezuela, now it's Venezuela going into Colombia, so we put a presence there like that. That's why it's like that. So and then also Mexico. So we are one of the only NGOs with a presence on both sides of the US-Mexico border, and we were invited to do that by UNHCR. And when I say both sides, you know, there are NGOs all along the border, and there are some doing work in Mexico, but very many fewer, and we're the only ones we do mirroring. So we'll have a presence in El Paso and then an office right up in Juarez, which is the Mexican side. So it's literally framing the crossing. So as people are kind of bumping up and down, we're there regardless of what side they're on. I do want to share two things about HIAS Mexico. The first is the mirroring, but the other cool thing is, I mean, maybe not cool is the right word, but a bit of synergy that I got excited about, I'll say, is that when it was in the news that there were both the Times and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal were trying to get their journalists out of Afghanistan, and there was like a side deal with the foreign minister of Mexico, and they ended up bringing about 115 people over there. The organization that served those people was HIAS Mexico. So because we were there from the border, it positioned us to then take on the needs of this group of people and help them get their documents and take care, do psychosocial interventions and do mental health care and all that stuff. So it was a really nice moment of synergy. We also have HIAS Europe based in Brussels. And unlike all these field offices, this is, okay, yes, I can talk slower. Unlike all of these field offices all over the world, HIAS Europe is actually an administrative office. It's actually registered with the European Union so that it's eligible for European funding and positioned to collaborate with European Jewish communities. And that was a very deliberate move to hedge against a donor. The US government was at one time our biggest donor, but it's a really uncomfortable position to be constantly suing your biggest donor. So that's the story of HIAS Europe. Still slower, okay. So next slide, please. Before I move on to our emergency response, I wanted to share just some pictures of HIAS in action around the world. These aren't my pictures, so I can't completely tell you each individual spot, but I know some of these. I know that the middle one is HIAS Chad. The bottom middle one is Ecuador, and that is Sabrina Lustgarten. She used to run Ecuador, and she is now the executive vice president of HIAS. The bottom right is Guyana. That's HIAS Guyana. You can actually see the person in the bottom of that picture with the vest that says HIAS. And that is a crossing that has that gets into Venezuela, that gets a high percentage of indigenous people, and they're doing an assessment in terms of needs on the ground. That particular area has a lot of issues with hygiene and gender protection, and it's a very perilous crossing through jungle. And then the one above it is, I think that's Matamoros. I'm not sure exactly which camp, but that's Mexico. And that's a family being told they're finally being allowed out of MPP and into the United States. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. I do want to talk about emergency response. That's a capacity that we've really been building in the last several years. So we're one of the key. We're responding to a number of crises. In past years, they've been compounding and overlaying with each other. We were one of the key responders to the Afghan arrivals this fall. We are one of the only. These are the crises we're responding to, and then all. So 1. We were one of the key responders to the Afghan arrivals this fall. 2, We're one of the only international NGOs authorized to provide humanitarian support in Venezuela itself. The government has been very restrictive about who can come in. And now with the invasion of Ukraine, we're mobilizing our teams to stage an extended response in a place that we've had a presence for, we've actually been for 2 decades. One of the things that I've found to be particularly powerful is that each time HIAS is faced with a crisis, it prompts a period of rapid growth that leaves us in an increasingly better position to respond to the next crisis. So, 1, Afghanistan. We deployed staff to the US military bases, where, as I mentioned, there were 76,000 arrivals to help with processing and legal needs and just understanding who was in the country and what class of status were they even eligible for. We also provided a lot of, and continue to provide a lot of training to our affiliates because the legal and cultural needs of this population is different from some of the other refugees with whom they're used to working. Of the 76,000 that arrived, about 36,000 of them arrived under terms called Humanitarian Parole. So this is not an official immigration status. There isn't a way to get a green card or citizenship from this status. What it does is it allows Afghan humanitarian parolees to live and work in the United States for 2 years, but it doesn't grant any form of permanency. The big thing it doesn't grant also is the right to reunite with family members, which is really huge because of the chaotic way that people left. There's some really disturbing and sad stories around this. It essentially leaves these people in limbo while they are trying to start their lives in new communities. And for many of them, their only option is going to be to apply for asylum, which is infamously cumbersome and horribly, horribly backlogged because so many entry opportunities were closed during COVID and then in the previous administration. So one of our main advocacy priorities as Congress is finishing its federal funding negotiation is the Afghan Adjustment Act. They're calling it the AAA. And the AAA would allow Afghan humanitarian parolees to automatically get on the path to obtain green cards and become citizens. So I hope you'll consider reaching out to your member of Congress about this. And there is more info about it on our website. And actually, Vanessa, the last slide has all of our contact information. And you just go to the HIAS Take Action page once you go to our main website, and that has all kinds of advocacy materials. Ukraine. So our team began preparing for a situation in which Russia might invade back in January. That's what I mean about building up our emergency response. 2 years ago, we didn't have this capacity, but we now have teams that are monitoring the world and saying that's an area that could get big, that's an area, and like, what are we going to do if it does? But the key thing is that we never expected it to be on this scale. We didn't, and neither did our partner. Our plans were about evacuating from east to west, not into Europe. HIAS has been active in Ukraine since 2000. And we spun off into a separate Ukrainian nonprofit called Right to Protection in 2014. Though a lot of people there still call us HIAS Ukraine. And R2P, that's the Right to Protection, R2P, provides legal and humanitarian aid to people displaced from Eastern Ukraine. Right now, they're working to keep their staff safe and provide them with access to counseling, while also doing protection assessments, distributing non-food items like blankets and diapers and that kind of thing, and tents. And they're also, with HIAS's help, trying to scale up their Western operations. They were primarily in the eastern part of the country, and so they've moved a bunch of their offices to the west. R2P is operating a hotline within Ukraine for mental health support and is providing in-person mental health care in Western Ukraine. And they're doing protection monitoring at the checkpoints and planning to restart legal protection work soon. We also sent an emergency team delegation to Poland on March 1st. They are returning today. They've been assessing needs and partnership opportunities in the region. So, as I mentioned, just as in the US, the same thing applies internationally. We support and we amplify local organizations. We're not here to duplicate. We're not here to walk in and say, the Americans are here and we're going to do it better. We want to amplify the things that are going on the ground and support, and we want to look for the gaps that aren't being filled and fill them. Where we've recruited a short-term Ukraine crisis coordinator based in Poland, and she's already started working this past week, and we're recruiting a team lead and several other emergency staff to deploy to Poland and Ukraine. There's going to be five staff members with experience in mental health care, particularly around mental health care first aid, multi-purpose cash. So right now, the best way to help is through cash assistance, because there are stores open. There is commerce happening, especially in Poland and some parts of Lviv. So we want to make sure that if people are able to, that we want to give them the ability to make their own choices and especially be able to pay for emergency housing and transportation. But getting cash to people on the ground is actually a fairly complicated thing in a crisis. So that's why we're putting a staff member on the ground there. Child protection is a really big concern, especially since the men are not being allowed to cross. So you get a lot of children forced to cross by themselves. And then gender-based violence. As I said before, anytime there are women, girls, and LGBTQ individuals in a displacement situation, there's going to be really big concern around that. The shelters that we're seeing, not only are they overcrowded, they're not segregated by gender, and that's a huge protection risk. We're actively pursuing partnerships with local organizations to provide a full complement of assistance to refugees in Poland and elsewhere. I know that there's going to be another assessment going in the other countries, so like Slovakia, Moldova, that kind of thing. That's like the next tier. In the US, we're providing legal advice to Ukrainians applying for temporary protected status. That was recently just approved. We're very pleased that that has been approved. We think it could benefit up to 70,000 Ukrainians here in the United States. And we're working on setting up a hotline for questions about asylum and refugee issues. And we're not anticipating Ukrainian resettlement right now, but it's still early days, and resettlement is a later part of a crisis. It's part of an early recovery, not a emergency care situation. One thing, and we haven't heard anything about large scale Ukrainian resettlement in the United States, but one thing we are advocating for is for the US to resettle Ukrainians with close family ties. There's actually a provision for this. It's through the Lautenberg Amendment, which allows U.S. family members to apply for close relatives to come here. There are already several thousand people in the pipeline, and they're a little stuck. So one very concrete thing that the U.S. can do is to unstick them, and then open. The applications are also closed for this program, so they need to clear the pipeline and then open it for more, because we know that we're going to see a lot of need there. That is one pathway that could be helpful without opening the floodgates necessarily. So that's it. I'm going to reopen the floor for questions in a minute, but I just want to say that the work we do is so broad. There are whole universes of our work that I haven't even touched on here, and it's actually one of my favorite things, because it really means that there's something for everybody who I talk with to get excited about. So I encourage you to ask questions and tell me what you want to know more about, and what keeps you up at night, and if there's a region of the world that you want to hear about, I would be happy to hold forth. And I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that I can deepen your experience with our work so that you can be an ambassador for refugees and displaced people here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I know Carol or Alan have a comment or question. Go ahead.
Three things. Erin, first of all, thanks very much for this.
Absolutely.
Very
Thank
informative.
you for your work, Alan.
Thanks. Two other quick things. at least half of the Human Needs Committee is on here today, Diane, Floyd, and me. And I want all congregants to know that the Human Needs Fund recently made a donation to HIAS specifically for the Ukrainian crisis. The other thing is the Afghan Adjustment Act. I periodically write to a number of members of the congregation who I know are interested in and involved in refugee issues. One of the things I've recently written about is to support passage of the Afghan Adjustment Act. If anyone who's listening today would like to receive my periodic refugee questions and comments, send me an email and I'll quickly add you to the list.
That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
I'm also putting in the HIAS website in the chat, so you can click in there. Oh, and somebody asked, oh, that was you. So you can click on there and get to HIAS. And of course, if you have any other questions after we're done today, we're recording, you can relook at everything. And we can also get in touch with Erin. Any other questions? Let me see if anyone is waving their hand. Also, there's a lot going on in the Chicago area to help Ukrainian refugees and the Union for World Progressive Judaism. And one of the things that I shared with Erin before we got on today, Legacy Lakeside also sponsored a refugee family, and I went through some training, and I had no idea that many of these refugees are in the pipeline for 17 years, 18 years, and whether they're in resettlement camps or, they get married, and there's podcasts and there's so many things that you can listen to that you can learn more about this terrible situation. I do have a question from Jim Schuster. Have you done any work with the Rohingya in Southeast Asia? I hope I pronounced that correctly.
We don't have operations there, but we're very connected with the there's like the Rohingya justice. We are involved as advocates and as organizers, but we don't really have a base of support. It's very hard to get into Burma, so that really inhibits our ability to be on the ground.
Alan?
Vanessa, if I can just add something on that. In 2018, Legacy Solel co-sponsored a Rohingya family who we're still working with. And the next family that we're going to bring in next month, Burma is one of the countries from which many people are still coming and that Refugee One is bringing in. So it is a possibility that we will be co-sponsoring another Rohingya family. We just don't know yet.
Yes, and our affiliates do work, once they're in the resettlement pipeline, we do work with them. But in terms of broad-based humanitarian work in country, that's not something that we're able to do.
If you don't live in Chicago or a city with HIAS, although I guess you could check and see if there's a Refugee One there, is it best to just contribute money, or is there another way we can help?
I mean, I'm never going to say no to contributing money. There are actually, if you go to the Take Action, hias.org/take action, I think that, well, just go to hias.org and click on the link that says Take Action. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities, especially, one thing that COVID has done in a positive way is it's forced us / enabled us to bring a lot of our work on remote. So especially if you are a Spanish speaker or a lawyer, there is so much you can do remotely. And so I would very much encourage you to take a look at that. And, advocacy is always needed and appreciated. And, putting on programs like this. But yes, I mean, well, I guess you could see if there's a welcome circle, but those are so local, like we wouldn't be posting where those are because that's just so grassroots. But I mean, I think the big thing is the remote volunteer opportunities. Those are definitely something that you could consider that are not geographically based. And I'd also try to connect. I try to see if HIAS isn't in the area, who's helping refugees, because as I said, we're all part of the same response is the other piece.
Okay. Pamela.
Ooh.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The highest in Ecuador, how many of the staff are Jewish, and do you need to be does non-Jewish people work with HIAS, and is there a large Jewish population in Venezuela? Is that why there's the need in Ecuador?
No, we're actually there. 40% of our staff is Jewish, and that percent is much lower outside of the United States. Sabrina she is the descendant of Holocaust survivors who fled to Ecuador. So her family goes way back in that region. But no, we're in Ecuador because we were there to respond to humanitarian concerns, refugee flows from Colombia mainly. And it's also, and then that became our regional hub for all of our other stuff. So there are Jews in Venezuela, and we are involved with serving them. It's not a big community. A lot of them, those who had resources left already. So we help those who remain. But no, the reason we have so many people in Ecuador is because there's just a lot of work to be done in that region. And Ecuador is a really central place and is a place that has a lot of people transiting through it on their way, sometimes to stay and sometimes on their way to other destinations. So it becomes a really good spot for us to be delivering services and kind of then helping people on their way.
Thanks.
Okay. We're closing up under an hour, and I just wanted to remind everybody of a few things. If you ordered Humanitarian, go pick them up. And the spiel is Wednesday night. You're not going to want to miss that. And actually, I can give a commercial for next week. It's going to be Jimmy Rothschild from Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, and he's talking about housing and economic justice in Chicago. So the link will be in Makom at Home. We'll be back here at 10 o'clock. And you're getting a lot of thank yous, Erin. You should look in the chat. And just thank you, everyone, for your generosity, for your participation in everything that Makom Solel Lakeside does for refugees, the Human Needs Committee, and it's great to see everyone. And an early Hag Sameach for Purim.
Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Purim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful show program.
Thank you all.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.